Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa on the 7th of July 2014. You're watching us from the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll take you in a recap of all the key business stories that you need to know about between Cairo and Johannesburg and Nairobi over the eastern coast to Lagos on the other end of the African continent. Enjoy the ride, it's going to be a good one. Here's what's coming up. Industry players converge in London to review gold's global pricing after nearly a century of the same pricing model. We'll be breaking down the reasons live. Kenya records another milestone in the fast-growing mobile money sector. We'll be taking a deep dive into that. And amidst economic doom and gloom, Cape Town's boat-making industry maintains its glow. Let's start tonight in London, where bullion banks, refiners of gold, central banks and mining companies are all meeting for the first time to start the process of reforming gold's global reference price. The World Gold Council has announced plans to switch to using price data from actual trades instead of submitted quotes. Data from the council shows that gold mine output rose by 6%, while recycled gold output was down about 13%, give or take, partly due to improving economic conditions in the first quarter of the year. Overall, that led to a marginal increase in total supply to just over 1,000 tons. South Africa, Ghana, Mali and Tanzania, in that order, are the key gold producers in Africa. Now, then, African gold producers in total accounted for about 19% of global output in 2013. So what is at stake for them in here? Let's find out. Melanie Ralph has been keeping tabs on the World Gold Council's meeting in London, from where she joins us now. Melanie, what exactly is it that prompted this debate, and what outcome should we expect from this meeting?
Well, it's been years since the gold price fixing has been looked at, and we needed attention to get it backed up, standards up to date. And the meeting was attended by delegates representing all parts of the industry, including central banks, bullion banks, refiners, ETFs and other gold investment product sponsors. As well as discussing a reformed benchmark, they looked at the pros and cons of any alternative price setting mechanism. Essentially, they agreed there's a need for a single trusted benchmark reference price, and it's important for continuity of price discovery to avoid market disruption. They also concluded that it's important to reflect the full range of market participants in the process. The World Gold Council also say London should remain the local price reference in any reform to the current gold fix process. So a lot covered at today's meeting.
Indeed, Melanie, but there's a difference, of course, between needing market reform and actually wanting market reform. Are market participants actually wanting to see these reforms implemented?
Well, that's the question. In general, market participants want reform, but they don't want a replacement of the existing benchmark. They would, of course, welcome more transparency, but also separate of who administers the benchmark and who participates. These areas were covered at the meeting today, and there was an agreement for the need of a transparent benchmark which mitigates any potential reputational risk for those administering the benchmark. Also, there should be a requirement to separate market making from benchmark administration.
Indeed. Let's talk about gold's sibling here, silver. We're seeing some reform in the pricing of that particular commodities market. Will today's meeting in any way influence the silver market?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's been already a lot of reform to the silver market, and they're a lot further down the line than pricing in the gold market. We know that come August 15th, the silver price fix will disappear, whereas there's no deadline for gold yet. For the silver markets, they want to process to go electric. At the moment, the fix is set every day by noon by HSBC, Deutsche Bank and Scotiabank, which get together over the telephone to work out the price as to which their customers are willing to buy and sell the metal. So there's certainly a will from the markets to move into the 21st century.
Indeed. Finally, Melanie, let's get back to gold. Most of the demand growth that we saw in 2013, ironically enough, came from the Middle East. We saw a triple-digit rise in demand from Egypt alone. What's driving demand specifically in the Middle Eastern region?
Well, the analysts I have spoken to say that Egypt is a trading hub for exporting the yellow metal, so more like a stockist. We know that countries like China and India are where the physical commodity is held. Also, known as the domain markets. But Egypt is not a place gold goes to and stays. It moves on, and we all know that gold is considered a safe haven asset, so its price has appreciated recently thanks to the global unrest we're seeing in places like Iraq and Ukraine. However, we are seeing gold edge down as equity markets remain strong, especially after we saw US employment growth jump in June, indicating economic growth in one of the world's largest economies.
Indeed, we'll have to leave it there for the time being. Thank you very much for that. That's Melanie Ralph there live in London. Let's move on now to Sudan. Headline inflation there went up to 45.3% in June. That's reflecting about a 10% or so rise in consumer goods prices. And prices over there have been soaring ever since South Sudan seceded in 2011, taking with it about 3/4 of the country's proven crude oil reserves. Sudan depends highly on oil for its government revenue, and its currency has fallen quite a bit after the secession, leading to a surge in the prices of food and other imported commodities. The soaring cost of living is also causing quite a bit of social unrest. Austerity measures and government plans to cut fuel subsidies have sparked protests right across Sudan. The country's president, Omar Hassan al-Bashir, has been in power for 25 years. He survived everything from armed rebellions, US sanctions, and an indictment as well from the International Criminal Court on charges of war crimes in Darfur. Over in South Africa, the Metal Workers Union says wage talks to settle a week-old strike will resume on Tuesday, the 8th of July. Over 200,000 union members downed their tools last week, demanding wage hikes of between 12 and 15%, depending on the company and the sector. The strike was yet another blow to South Africa's economy, coming barely a week after a crippling 5-month strike in the platinum sector. The Steel and Engineering Industry Federation said last week that NUMSA rejected its offer of a 10% wage hike. The country's metals industry is losing about $28 million a day in lost revenue as a direct result of the strike. The union is also demanding that any pay agreements apply for a year. The companies, however, want to stretch any such agreement over 3 years. Let's bring you up to speed now. The latest developments in South Africa. Angelo Coppola has been keeping tabs on things from Johannesburg, and that's where he's coming to us live from right now. Angelo, the union says talks are to resume tomorrow, even though there's been more or less no new offer from employers. So what's on the agenda for that meeting?
Well, tomorrow's meeting is going to happen with the Steel and Engineering Industries Federation, or SEIFSA, and resolution appears to be on the agenda. According to a source that we spoke to, the two parties may be a bit closer than they were last week. But if they do reach an agreement tomorrow, it has to go back to their members for approval and for a mandate. There's no other mention, though, of the other employer union, the bigger one, the National Employers Association of South Africa, or NIASA, being in those talks. Those talks were deadlocked on Friday. NIASA wanted to reduce entry-level wages and put an 8% offer on the table. NUMSA, of course, said they're not interested, and they're going to have discussions with SEIFSA. The issue here is that if there is an agreement with SEIFSA and NUMSA, it's likely that NIASA will go to the Labour Court to stop being part of that agreed figure, whatever it might be, 10, 12 or 15%. So as it stands right now, talks start tomorrow. They're with SEIFSA, but the strike continues. Raman?
Indeed, Angelo. We heard about a 10% offer last week from the Steel and Engineering Industry Federation, and NUMSA allegedly rejected that offer. Do we have any more details on exactly why they didn't like it?
Well, we don't have any concrete reason why NUMSA rejected the offer, but it may have something to do with the fact that NUMSA hardened its stance in some of the regions on the 1st, changing that 12% compromised wage offer to 15%. Now, SEIFSA's 10% obviously would have been closer to the 12%, so they probably would have been closer to a deal. But when SEIFSA didn't go for that 12%, NUMSA leaders in some of the regions upped it back to their original demand of 15%, Raman. So that's where we're sitting.
Indeed, we'll have to leave there for the time being. That's Angelo Coppola live in Johannesburg. He'll be keeping tabs on developments in NUMSA strike. This is its 2nd straight week. GM's operations, of course, have been affected. Not Mercedes and not Toyota. It's an interesting development right there. We'll keep tabs on it for you right here on Global Business. Let's move on to Malawi. Its president, Peter Mutharika, says his government will get to the bottom of a cash scandal that has rocked the country since September last year. That scandal is better known as Cashgate. Basically, it involves some government officials who've allegedly been exploiting a loophole in a computer-based financial management system to divert millions from government coffers into theirs. Now, it's estimated that up to $250 million may have been lost through fraudulent payments to businessmen for services that were never actually rendered. And that in turn led to a freeze of aid by donors who say the country lacks transparency in its fiscal management. Quick run through the markets here for you. Some interesting numbers coming out across the board. Last week, Friday, as you might recall, the JSE All-Share Index closed at record highs. Not the case today. It's slightly pedaling back. And we've seen something similar in the EGX 30. The markets are looking for direction, especially after the implementation of the subsidy cuts that we saw last week. When we come back, we'll be looking at Kenya. It's recording another milestone in the fast-growing mobile money sector. And amidst the economic gloom and doom, Cape Town's boat-making industry is maintaining its glow. We'll see you in a few minutes on Global Business. Africa is on the move. It's home to 7 of the world's 10 fastest-growing economies.
From small businesses to large-scale enterprises, hear directly from entrepreneurs behind the story. It's about putting you in the picture so you know where Africa fits in the global context.
Global Business, weekdays at this time on CCTV Africa.
African leaders have been urged to make it easier to move and do business across borders within the African continent.
Africans should be free to move in their continent, to do business, to interact, if we are to grow the levels of investment and trade that will ensure that we are able to create the jobs for our people that we require.
Welcome back to the program. You're on Global Business Africa. Kenya is expected to witness a fairly aggressive rollout of a new mobile money transfer system called MOBIKASH to rival the established and fairly widespread M-Pesa and Airtel money systems. Now, the company first came to the market in 2011. Its chief executive for Kenyan operations, Duncan Otieno, says it plans to roll out a seamless real-time payment service that should enable Kenyans to transfer money right across networks. Now, MOBIKASH will also offer a platform to pay bills, deposit and withdraw money from any bank account. It expects to tap into the fairly expansive customer base for mobile money. That's estimated to be about 25 million Kenyans, well over half the entire population. To date, the firm has over 4,000 agents right across the country. And Duncan Otieno is the CEO, of course, of MOBIKASH's Kenya operations. He joins me now in studio. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Let's start with the distinction between what MOBIKASH is and what M-Pesa is, because at face value, they enable someone to do more or less the exact same things. How would you explain the difference between your service and M-Pesa?
Thank you very much. Basically, we are all mobile money service operators. And the difference is we work across all the networks. And across the network means that you can be able to get MOBIKASH on the 4 mobile network operators currently in Kenya. And we have made it very simple to go down to the grassroots levels where you just dial *365 hash and you get MOBIKASH on that.
And that applies across all networks?
Across all the networks. So. And we believe everybody knows there are only 365 days in a year, and that's MOBIKASH. Now, basically, if you are transferring money, take for example, you are registered with MOBIKASH. When you're transferring to somebody who is registered, the difference that we have compared to the others, we tell you whom you are sending the money to before you send that particular money. So if you're sending to
so you don't get that information after the fact,
no,
which is
you
what
get
happens
it before.
with Safaricom
Yes,
and Airtel
yes,
and
you
so
get
on.
it before. Then we also send to unregistered persons as well. The only difference is we pre-register you when you get money as unregistered, because the requirement to register for MOBIKASH is to be able to show your ID, and is the same for if you're doing a deposit and withdrawal. Then we don't force you to withdraw that money within 7 days like the others will do. Yeah, because when you go to the agent, you'll be registered immediately and do your withdrawal. Then our rates are also standard. If you're sending to registered or unregistered, the rates are the same.
Okay, so in essence, your main competitive edge, for lack of a better word, would be the fact that you operate across the silos.
Good.
Right. Let's move on to talk about banks, because as far as I know so far, National Bank and Postbank are the banks that have signed up to your service.
Yes.
But they're a tiny fraction of the 40 plus banks that we have here. What's your plan to break into the top 6, top 5 banks in the country?
Okay, basically our model, the banks that are just coming in our model, it is just an added value to the MOBIKASH. But generally we target even those who are not banked. So the banks here is just to facilitate those who want to go beyond the MOBIKASH limits, because in our system or in the mobile money schemes there are limits that are there. Like in our case, we have 100,000 Kenya shillings that you can be able to hold into your account. So if you feel you need to extend, then you can link your bank account into the MOBIKASH platform. But we are looking into the other banks as well. And by the end of this month, we'll be reaching to close to about 36 banks through a bank switch that you're getting into that will be able to take us to more banks. But you have to start somewhere anyway.
Right.
Yes.
Talk to me about your cost structure, because as I understand it, the thing about mobile money is that it's very tight when it comes to margins between moving cash from point A to point B, paying your agents, covering your capital expenditure, your overheads and so on and so forth. How do you structure your costs in order to ensure that you still keep that margin for sending money?
Basically, the mobile money business is more of a transaction based and volume. So we thrive on the number of volumes that we do, and you find that for the minimal transaction that we do, which is also the same with the other players in the market, and you have seen the figures that are being moved within those particular players.
Yeah.
So it is the number of transactions that we push for us to be able to get more income.
But let's, talking about volume though, Safaricom is the elephant in the room, for lack of a better word.
Yes,
so relative to them, what's your market share? How much do you move?
Basically, we move close to about 150 million.
In a day or in a year?
No, in a month, yeah. And that is actually growing. And would say that, yes, they are still ahead, and we are just behind them. And we believe very soon we'll be catching closer to them. Yes. Yeah.
Right, final question to you. Banks in other jurisdictions have always tended to be an obstacle to innovation, to expansion of mobile money. But in Kenya, well, initially they were, but now they're actually embracing it. But when you go to, say, Standard Chartered, KCB, and so on and so forth, and you say, we're MOBIKASH, would like to do business with you, what's your competitive edge compared to, say, Safcom and Airtel? Because they will ask that question.
In our partnership with the banks, we offer them what we call alternative mobile banking channels. Just like you have banks that have their own ATMs, and they also go with the other independent ATM providers.
Your Pesa points, you can switch and so on.
And the rest, yeah. Now you find in our case also we offer the same, but in the mobile banking angle. So we can partner with you, and your customers can be able to access all our agent network. So in fact, if you go to, let's say, any bank and you find that they don't have enough agent network, they can easily access our agent network. And the operations with our agents is actually seamless. So you might find one agent, they can be able to serve all the banks, assume all the banks are within our network. They can actually be able to serve the bank customers with one procedure, not different procedure for each of the banks. Yeah. So that's our selling points to the banks.
All right, we'll have to leave there for the time being. But Mr. Otieno, thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you very much.
All right. Right, let's move on away from mobile money. The ratings agency Moody's, it has warned that it could downgrade South Africa yet again, especially given the fact that a huge strike, which we covered a little early in the bulletin with Angelo, is heading now into its second week. Amidst all the doom and the gloom of economic news coming out of South Africa, however, it's very easy to overlook some interesting points of light, as CCTV's Guy Henderson explains in What's Hot Tonight.
Setting off on one final test run. The Mirage 760 is the latest generation of design, built by a family firm of boat lovers, all on board here to check that everything's running as it should be. Soon their second export of this model will be shipped to Asia, a day sail for karaoke lovers. The family hope this will be another one of many.
Owners of this calibre don't have one country of residence, so they Europeans, Americans, now South Koreans, which hopefully we can get into Asia, and that would be really very, very nice, and looking forward to that, because I think the market is really open for this sort of thing.
Matrix Yachts has sniffed a gap and, like other firms along the Western Cape Coast, reckons it's in prime position to take advantage.
Now, if you happen to be in the market for a commercial tanker, you might well be better off looking somewhere else. But when it comes to recreational boats, industry bosses here reckon they've got some of the best builders anywhere. It's a growth sector in an economy where such things are still few and far between. And what's more, government is beginning to recognise that.
I've started to see a steady increase in growth for the recreational boat.
Vanessa Davidson heads up the Marine Industry Association. She says the sector is now a priority in government action plans. It's just received a substantial research grant.
If you look at how technology is driving new developments all the time, not just in boat building and all the different sectors, and we need to keep up with that. So by being assisted with an injection of grant money towards research and development for the industry, we are better placed globally to keep our technological developments.
But companies know sustainability requires skills investment too, so they've funded Africa's first and only boat building academy. These two classmates are still in the first year of their course, and they're loving it.
We've never turned back. It's just been a wonderful experience. I've never regretted a single second of it. It's absolutely amazing. There's something about doing work on a boat, dealing with wood, metal, just every little detail is in this course. I've loved it to a fine art.
They might be starting small, but they've ambitions to put this ancient craft to use on a larger scale.
Ultimately, I want to go into building luxury powerboats. I always like powerboats. I mean, sailing is fun. I enjoy both. Yep. But yeah, petrol head at heart. So.
There's plenty of opportunity for that here. South Africa is the second largest catamaran producer in the world. With several academy employees in its ranks, this yard only builds a few a year, but they're top of the range. This one costs around $9 million US, worth every penny, says the yard's general manager.
We work really closely with the customer. They're very custom built vessels right down to the finishing product.
Manufacturing is in decline nationally, and this small sector may not have the clout to reverse that trend on its own. But in an economy that's struggling to grow at all, there are still some hidden heroes. Guy Henderson, CCTV, Cape Town, South Africa.
Now, just before we take a quick break, here's a quick run through the commodities news for you. There's a fairly broad spread of red numbers right across the board. Cocoa, of course, pulling back from some of the highs that we saw last week. About 3-year highs over there. 3,111 is the relevant number. When we come back, we'll be in Nigeria. We'll be talking about a startup that's making mountains of gold out of mountains of waste. All that and more is coming up. At 18:23 GMT, you're watching Global Business Africa. Let's move on to Nigeria, the commercial capital of Lagos. It's a huge city, generates about 10,000 tons of waste a day. Getting rid of it, predictably, is a problem. Much of that waste ends up in dump sites, and only a fraction of it is usually, if ever, recycled. As Deji Badmus reports on Grassroots tonight, however, one startup is making a very strong case for more emphasis on recycling and changing people's attitudes to waste disposal.
Every day of the week, Ayokunle rides through some of the roughest streets of Lagos on this specially made bicycle, collecting waste from designated households. But it's not any kind of waste. He collects used plastic bottles, water sachets, and aluminium cans. He's one of 22 others who work for a social enterprise startup known as WeCyclers. It's a unique environmental initiative started by MIT graduate Bilkis Adebiyi Abiola some 2 years ago to collect recyclable waste in a city that generates tons of it but is struggling to dispose them.
We work in low-income communities with a fleet of low-cost cargo bicycles. Those bicycles provide convenience collection services to households. In return, households get points via SMS, which they can redeem for prizes. They can get things like blenders, toasting machine, generator, and even cash. And the material we collect is aggregated and then sold to recyclers.
The initiative is gaining popularity. About 5,000 households have now signed up with Recyclers. On a 5-day week, the organization collects around 3 tons of waste from its subscribers.
The people that lived in this community before we came here didn't have any idea on the usage and the importance of all these materials. And since we've come in, we've been able to change their mindset. And I think we've been very successful, but when you look at the bigger picture, Lagos is a city of about 20 million people. With our little 5,000 households, we haven't really made much of an impact, but we are working hard and we know very soon that we're going to get there.
Recyclers may be modest about its achievement, but imagine the environmental impact if all these empty plastic bottles and sachets were piling up in drains around the city. This is the hub where the waste collected for the day are brought in, weighed, sorted and bagged for onward transmission to the recyclers. Apart from helping to clean up the environment, Recyclers is also creating jobs. With just 3 staff when it began, the startup now has 42 staff on its payroll.
People are, have been calling us and telling us that, why don't you come to my state? Why don't you come to my city? We have this issue of waste. We need jobs. We hope by the end of this year to have about 100 jobs created.
In a country with high unemployment rate, Recyclers is surely helping to plug a hole. But as the enterprise expands, Bilkis says the subscribers are asking for more.
We are a social enterprise, so we give them a share of the value that we get. So we can only give them more if we get more at the point of sale, which is why we need investments into machines.
It's the end of the day's round for Ayokunle. He's come back to the hub to deliver his collection. The waste is weighed and recorded against his name and the subscriber. At the end of the month, the subscriber will get their gift and Ayokunle will get his salary. All thanks to Recyclers. Deji Badmos, CCTV, Lagos, Nigeria.
Now, speaking of Nigeria, let's make a quick run through the currencies. The Naira relatively flat in trading today. Not much of an impact there as far as weak dollar demand is concerned. The Forex Bureau are told to raise the capital base from about 5 million Naira, where it was before, to about 35 million, give or take. Keep a close eye on the South African Rand as well with respect to the strike moving forward. Some weakness may feed in to the Rand as well. It's essentially Rand negative for the week ahead. Just before we go, here's a quick run through what's coming up on Global Business. Tomorrow, the National Union of Metalworkers of South Africa resume wage talks, as we mentioned earlier, with employers, as the now 2-week strike strains the economy. We'll bring you the latest on that developing story right here on Global Business. And elsewhere, Ethiopia's Rift Valley is becoming the new sensation for wine growers. The East African country is aggressively developing a wine industry. That should be interesting to look at and enjoy as well. That's it for this edition of Global Business. To send us your feedback on the program, we practically thrive on it. globalbusinessafrica@cctv.com is the email address to use, or else you can get in touch with us anywhere else on social media, Facebook, Twitter. We're certainly all over there. That's it for this edition of the program. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next 24 hours. I'm Ramanya.